So good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Almar. I am the chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture here at Rutgers, and welcome to this morning's panel discussion 8, Vision for a Place. So this morning we'll have 3 speakers. We have Donna Rendero, Executive Director of the New Jersey Office of Planning Advocacy. We have James Welsh, Senior Associate Architect for MKW. And you're gonna have to excuse me, Rupert. I'm gonna ruin your last name here. Rupert Halsbertschlager, something like that?
Kind of, yeah. Halbertschlager.
Okay, thank you so much. And you're gonna have to tell us the name of your firm also.
Of course, Bauchplan.
Hey, so thank you for that. And what I'll do is, before you start your presentations, if you can give us just a short bio, so everybody gets to know you a little bit better, a little bit more about your background and what you do. So we'll speak in the order of Donna, James, and Rupert. So Donna, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. First, I want to thank my planning partners in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. I would have loved to have been there in person. I am on vacation this week, and I asked the planning folks in the Outer Banks if they would give me a conference room, and they have done so. So here I am in North Carolina. I have been with the Office of Planning Advocacy, which is the administrative support for the State Planning Commission, for about 2 years now, a little over 2 years. I've done economic development, I've done shared services, I've done redevelopment at the municipal, county, and state level in a variety of different capacities. I worked for the Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency. I was Chief of Staff and Chief of Administration there. And that organization provides financing for affordable housing throughout New Jersey. I've done redevelopment at the local level, at the county level, and I've participated at the state level. I've done brownfield redevelopment. And prior to being with state service or public service for 23 years, I was a branch manager at Citibank, and I was chief of staff to the senior credit officer for 23 years. So I've had some private sector experience as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the land use implications of climate change strategies. I am certainly not a scientist, and I cannot speak to the science around it other than the fact that I do believe it. And even if I don't understand the science behind climate change, I see it every day in New Jersey in places where we never saw it before. But for our friends that are not familiar with New Jersey, I just want to give a brief overview of what New Jersey looks like. We are the densest state in the nation. We have over 1,000 people per square mile, but we're also one of the most diverse states in the nation. We have one of the wealthiest counties in the nation. We have one of the poorest cities in the nation. We have some of the safest and some of the most dangerous municipalities. We have some municipalities that have over 50,000 people per square mile, and we have some that have 2 people per square mile. So we also have urban, suburban, farmland, beaches, forests, and rural areas. So we really have it all. But what makes New Jersey a little unique is we not only have 140 miles of Atlantic Ocean coastline, we have 250 miles of Delaware Bay and River coastline as well. We also have throughout New Jersey, even with inland, 300,000 acres of tidal wetlands. We have 565 municipalities that have sole land use authority, which means we have 565 different opinions about what should happen in New Jersey and their municipalities. It makes it a little difficult to come to consensus, but everyone has their own ideas about what their municipality should look like. But on top of that, we have the New Jersey State Planning Act. It requires the state to develop a state development and redevelopment plan that's supposed to guide and encourage development in appropriate places. There are 8 goals in the New Jersey State Plan, and they're very diverse, and we need to, one of our requirements is that we treat all goals equally. So some of those goals: revitalize cities and towns. We want to conserve natural resources and systems. We want to promote beneficial economic growth, development, and renewal. We want to protect the environment. We want to clean up pollution. We want to provide adequate public facilities and services. We want to provide adequate housing at reasonable costs. We want to preserve and enhance areas with historic, cultural, and scenic open space and recreational value. And we want to ensure sound and integrated planning and implementation statewide. On the surface, many of those goals could be conflicting. However, our job is to ensure that we treat and balance all of those goals and treat them all equally. Every acre in the state is identified by planning areas, centers, cores, and nodes. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But consistency with the state plan is voluntary. So one of our challenges is to ensure that of those 565 municipalities, if a municipality choose to become consistent with the state plan, we should be offering incentives. And if we cannot offer incentives, what are the things that we need to do to ensure that municipalities are consistent with the state plan? As part of the state plan, we have a state plan policy map, and pretty much everything's driven that way. Where we encourage growth is in planning areas 1, 2, and centers. And you could see by this map, the dark red and the pinks are planning areas 1 and 2, which are the urban areas and the suburban areas that we do encourage growth in. The browns are kind of the transition periods, places, planning areas 3, and then we have planning areas 4 and 5, which are the environmentally sensitive that are color coded here in green. The interesting thing about this map is that when I looked at a map from 1935, it's pretty consistent. It's showing they had black and white maps at the time, but it's showing that this strip, this kind of call it the sash that goes from Newark and Jersey City up here to Camden here. This is the urban core of New Jersey. We have a lot of environmentally sensitive features here. This is up in the Highlands Preservation Area. We have the pinelands that are over here, also environmentally sensitive. And then throughout, there are pockets. If you'll notice, there are areas that we have previously designated for growth. This is along the Delaware River and the Delaware and the Delaware Bay, as well as along the Atlantic coast. So planning areas 1, 2, and centers have historically been targeted for density growth and commercial activity. But what happens now when we come, our state plan is old and it needs to be updated. And while we talked about in the state plan, climate change and environmental justice, the plan was done in 2001. It does need an update, and it did not emphasize those 2 areas to the extent that we need to look at them today. But what happens when those growth areas are in vulnerable areas? Yes, it's coastal as well, but it's also inland. There are areas that are inland that are vulnerable as well. But how do you balance that economic need with the need to be sustainable and address climate change? So traditionally, we have identified growth areas that encourages and incentivizes growth, economic development, and mixed use. We have these growth areas that we've identified. We offer impervious cover. We support increased density, sewer service areas, and other infrastructures that would not normally be given in exchange for protecting the environment. So a center-based development concept, which everyone I'm sure is familiar with. We have used center-based development historically within the state plan, and that historically has been enough to balance those goals that I talked about previously. And so that's what we've done in the past. So what happens today? questions that we need to address, and we certainly don't have all the answers now, but how do we protect against climate change while recognizing the economic needs of municipalities today? How do we ensure that there's a $40 billion tourism industry in New Jersey? You can't discount that. You can't discount the jobs that are created by that tourism industry. New Jersey's known as the Garden State. We have farmland. We are the blueberry capital of the world, and everybody knows about Jersey tomatoes. So how do you keep that, both the farmland industry and the farming industry and the tourism industry, and keep that up, but still protect against climate change? How do we recognize the needs of existing homeowners and business owners that are in those vulnerable areas? Some of them are luxury beach houses, but some are legacy homes that have been handed down from generation to generation. And those are the folks that can't continue to rebuild, that can't afford to rebuild. How do we leverage funding sources and coordinate efforts to ensure that there are no unintended consequences? So the water's got to go somewhere. So how do you ensure that when you do a resilience measure in one municipality, how it doesn't negatively impact a second? How do you take the federal funding sources? The Army Corps of Engineers just announced a $16 billion project for our barrier islands, but that only addresses a portion of our coast, and it only addresses one issue of storm surge. But how do you take that $16 billion and leverage that with state funding so that you're focusing all at the same place? And then how do you coordinate the state and county and local plans? So let's see. And the other thing that we need to look at, and this is probably one of the most difficult, is how do we educate elected officials and local constituents on the science to maximize the political will to do the right thing? If I'm a mayor today and I have $5 and I need to pay my police, do I do that? Or do I spend the money on looking at something that may or may be not impacting me today, may or may not impact me for 50 years, but now it's starting to come? So how do we convince the constituents that are the ones that are knocking on the mayor's doors and saying, why are you spending the money on all of this climate stuff? We need to improve our recreation. We need to buy more open space. What are some of the things? How do we help municipalities understand that it's important to do the right thing? So some possible solutions. We've talked previously about center-based incentives. I'd like to change the narrative to say, I don't want to incentivize you for center-based, having a center, although center-based planning is critical and it's important, but let's talk about plan endorsed incentives. So we want to talk about more generalized good land use planning practices. Let's incentivize those municipalities that want to do the right thing, both from a climate change perspective and an economic development perspective. We've been seeing a lot more impacts recently because of climate change, and that's getting a little bit easier. But the narrative should be, are you doing general good land use planning practices? And those good land use practices should be incentivized. We want to emphasize that centers are not only areas of growth, but we want to consider centers as areas of place. Historically, we have said that centers are areas that you want to develop in, but not every acre of a center needs to be developed. It should be an area that is an area of place that brings folks into the community, into a center of place, of activity. Could be recreation, it could be historical, but not every acre of a center needs to be developed. We want to allow wiggle room for redevelopment versus development. So I get we don't want to do new development in areas that are very vulnerable. But in areas that have existing infrastructure, we should work with those communities to make that infrastructure more resilient. But in order to do that, we need a little bit of wiggle room for redevelopment versus development. Isn't it better that we work with municipalities to help them make their existing infrastructure more resilient? And we can do that through working with them on state goals. We want to approach center designation with a goal of net increase of protected acres. Obviously, vulnerable areas, centers on barrier islands are going to be very, very difficult. However, if a municipality comes back and says they want this small, maybe 10-acre area for economic growth opportunity off on a main corridor or on an evacuation route, but they're willing to give back maybe 100 acres that they don't need to develop on. That's how we want to approach center designation. We want to approach it with a goal of a net increase of protected acres, because you still need to acknowledge the fact that a municipality needs to grow economically and create jobs for their residents. Resiliency planning should be done regionally. I'm a huge fan of regional planning for some things, and resilience is huge. There are many things that have to be done at the local level. I mentioned before, we have 565 municipalities that have sole authority on their land use. Zoning should remain at the local level. There are a number of things that should remain at the local level, but some things can be done regionally. Resilience planning is one of those. We want to emphasize the good neighbor policy. Again, that water has to go somewhere. And what I'm doing today in one municipality can't negatively impact my neighbor down the road. And we want to ensure capital projects are coordinated and well planned. It doesn't make sense to raise a road if you're not going to raise the houses. Or it doesn't make sense to raise the houses if you're not going to raise the road. So how do we ensure that all of our state agency partners are all walking in the same direction? And where we find that it's important to raise a road or create some kind of mitigation factors, we should coordinate all different state investment as well as local and federal investment. Finally, so there is not going to be one solution for New Jersey. There's going to be a number of different approaches we need to take. There's a lot of discussion about managed retreat and expansion of the Blue Acres program. For those of you that don't know what the Blue Acres program is, it requires, or it allows the state to buy out properties in vulnerable areas and turn them into parks, turn them into recreation areas. And it has been used in the past. It can get expanded, and that's one of the things we're looking at. Managed retreat is a lot more difficult to implement. We don't know how many people, if it's something that we're looking at, and we don't know if it's going to work or not, because how many people are we talking about? What are we taking? How many people need to come out of vulnerable areas to take them out of harm's way? And then in the areas that are not vulnerable, where are we going to move those folks to? Do we have the capacity for additional population in inland, not vulnerable areas? The available land in New Jersey is very, very constrained. There's not a whole lot of available land in New Jersey. What is vacant is either constrained by open space preservation, farmland preservation. Infrastructure is not there and may or may not be there. So how do we identify the available land that's not otherwise constrained? How do we look at infrastructure? Is there enough water and wastewater capacity? How are the smaller municipalities going to deal with an increase in municipal service needs and schools? How are we going to be able to handle that? All of that means additional density. There is no political will for additional density in New Jersey. Again, 565 municipalities, probably 500 of them do not want additional density. What happens? Do we build up If we do create additional density in those municipalities, there's going to be environmental impacts. There's going to be increased heat island effect. There's going to be a number of things that need to be addressed. So these are some of the issues that we need to deal with before we make a determination as to whether managed retreat makes any sense at all. And then when you're looking at the Blue Acres program, every time the state buys out a property, that municipality loses that property tax revenue. So if it's a large scale buyout, what happens to those municipalities? The cost of the infrastructure is kind of the elephant in the room here. I don't think there's enough money on the planet to deal with what needs to be done from an infrastructure perspective to become resilient. So we need to identify the priorities and work to coordinate all the different levels of funding. And then there's the issue of repetitive loss. I think New Jersey is not far behind like Louisiana in terms of repetitive losses. I talked previously about legacy homes versus vacation homes. The folks that have the $1 million vacation homes on the coast, I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. They can afford to rebuild without public assistance. The legacy homes are a lot more difficult. The homeowners there do not have the funds, and they are always looking for the feds and the state to help bail them out. However, does it make sense to continue to rebuild when you know there's going to be repetitive losses? Those are all things we're grappling with today. We don't know the answer to that. But what we do know is that if a municipality does choose to continue to develop in vulnerable areas, they need to have, one of my coworkers always says, skin in the game. We can't always assume that the federal government or the state government is going to come and bail everybody out. I really like the idea of a recovery or a resilience trust fund. We currently in New Jersey have an open space trust fund where the voters at the local level can decide to provide, and sometimes it's like 1 cent or 2 cents on every $100 of property value that gets added to your tax bill. So it's really minuscule and you really don't see it. But it all adds up. And that money today in an open space trust fund is used to buy open space to preserve it permanently, or farmland preservation. We can have a similar thing to that that would address recovery or resilience actions. But I think funding needs to come from all levels. We need to look at the insurance market. We need to look at, the feds will probably be there for a while. State will probably be there, but the operative word here is probably. So how do you make sure that the funding is leveraged and that municipalities that choose to develop have that ability to recover in a quick, efficient manner? So I don't have a lot of answers here, but these are the questions that we're dealing with today. And it's, like I said, it's not, I don't understand the science as much as a scientist can. I do know it's there, and I do know that there are land use implications related to it, that those are the things that we're trying to address today. So those were a lot of the questions. There are, like I said, very few answers right now, but these are the things that we're trying to look at today as part of state planning. So I don't know, do you want to do questions now or hold questions till later?
Yeah, we're going to hold the questions for a little later, Donna. Thanks for that presentation. You'll definitely get questions later on. So now we'll have Jim. Jim? Would you first give us a short introduction and then start your presentation?
Okay. Good morning. My name is Jim Welsh from MKW Associates, landscape architect. I've been working as a landscape architect in this region for over 30 years. working primarily in public, institutional, corporate type landscapes, outdoor spaces related to buildings or parks, museums, campuses, those types of projects. I'm currently working with MKW Associates. MKW Associates has been in business for over 50 years and definitely does a lot of their work in urban areas. And we're definitely priding ourselves on integrating sustainability and ecological consciousness into our design process. The work that I've been doing has primarily been in the New York, New Jersey region, but have been able to work in other places throughout the country, Atlanta, Dallas, Albany, Cleveland, but also abroad in China, Korea, Mexico, and the Middle East. So it's been a nice, diverse experience that I've had throughout my practice. Today, what I'd like to do is talk about something a little bit different than what Don was talking about. Our firm typically works with projects, and a project to us many times is just a site, and that site could be an acre, 2 acres, 20 acres, but it's definitely much smaller than the state of New Jersey, as Donna was talking about. So what can we do, or what do we do when we get a site, and what are the possibilities there to help out the issues of climate change through creating a sustainable landscape? And I'd like to show you some of the projects that we've been working on and what we've been doing, and then touch on maybe what some of the other firms in the nation have been doing as well. So let's look at the first slide, please. Okay, the first project that I wanted to talk about today is Lafayette Playground. Go back one, please. Lafayette Playground is a 1.7 acre project in Brooklyn. Some of the issues that we saw with the site, this was pre-development. It is a New York City park. It is within a floodplain in Brooklyn, definitely urban heat island effect because of all the residential and city development around it. Obviously, there's no shade trees on the interior. It's primarily an impervious asphalt surface as we came to that. So we couldn't really do too much more to harm this project. So we were pretty excited about this opportunity. Let's go to the next slide. So what we did is we worked with, go back one, please. We worked with New York City Parks as our client, the local community, as we always do with New York City Parks, and developed this site plan. As you can see, it's much different from the park as it was when we first came to the site. But what we do is we work with these different groups to come up with a site plan. It is not just an MKW design. It is a design that is developed in collaboration with, as I said, New York City Parks, the local community, and our team of engineers, and sometimes if there's more formidable structures on the site, maybe some architects. What we did here is created what we think is a really nice site plan. It greens up the space and it creates a place that is much more welcoming to the community. And I think one of the main things that we think about as designing spaces like this in an urban area is it's important to bring people to the urban areas because those spaces are much more efficient in maintaining and keeping people in those areas. So just by creating parkland that makes urban areas more desirous is a great thing, and it helps bring people into the urban areas and leave some of the greener areas of New York and the country as places that could absorb stormwater and grow our food and be the other open spaces that we need. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the first thing we did when we came to the site was we realized as much as there's impervious asphalt everywhere, there was a nice ring of trees around the outside. So we started to understand our site, and we think that's important to what we do. The ring of London plane trees became important throughout not only the design, but it started before the design as part of a way to protect these trees through demolition and then throughout the construction process. So one of the first things we did was protect the existing trees, and we think that can happen on many of the sites that we do work on. Let's go to the next slide. Another opportunity we looked at was, of course, reducing that impervious coverage on the site. We reduced impervious coverage by 20%. And looking at the first slide, we thought, there's a lot there. Can't you do maybe more than 20%? But because it's an urban area, because it does have program needs where there's lots of people in these areas and they want to get out and play and be active, we could only do so much. The original slide may have looked a little bit more green than 20% impervious coverage, but some of that is due to we created what was first thought of as maybe a lawn, but that changed into a synthetic turf area, which local governments considered impervious. So what we did was we created open space. We had to balance what our clients' needs were with the desire to be a more sustainable landscape and help the environment. Let's go to the next slide. Within those green and planting areas in the park, we created a planting palette that was 70% native. We thought that was a really good number. What that does is, by being a 70% native palette, it allowed us to decrease any irrigation needs in the park, and also create the park as a place for more insects and birds and little creatures that might be able to enjoy the environment that's being created out there. Let's go to the next slide, please. We thought shade was a critical part to making this park a more livable, more usable park. So of course, as I said at the beginning, we started with maintaining the existing trees, the existing shade that we could have out there. That was great. 2, we planted lots of trees out there, but they're not there yet in terms of providing a lot of shade for the community. So in the interim, we created shade structures. So with our shade, what we're doing is we're creating existing shade for now, shade structures to expand that shade for now, and then lots of shade trees to produce shade and great places for the people to be throughout the seasons. Of course, the interesting picture on the left, we have the shade, and there are some people there underneath the shade, but there are also many people out in the sun. So we want to create variety and options for this. With all this said, this is the last slide for this project, but we just want to address the fact that climate and sustainability is important to what we do. Balancing it with the program of the people and the community and what they want, very important. And then balancing it with a design aesthetic that attracts people to this place. So it's not just a place somewhere in New York, it's an attractive place that brings people in and they enjoy using it and it becomes part of the community. Let's go to the next slide, please. The next project we want to talk about is Dundee Island Park. Not quite as urban, but it is an urban area in the city of Passaic in New Jersey. Our client was the county of Passaic. We work with the Trust for Public Land for community engagement and project management. And then we worked with a host of engineers, Boswell Engineering, on this one specifically. This one is within a flood zone. You can see the project site there right along the Passaic River. Urban heat island, no shade in the center of the space. The soils had some issues in terms of pollution in there, so it became a very complicated project. But it was great for the city and the county to redevelop this space and turn it into something special. Let's go to the next slide, please. Once again, working with the Trust for Public Land and the community and the county and the city of Passaic, community engagement was a great starting point for our project, as it is for most of our projects, especially the public projects, where we can really hear what they want. We can develop that program for what the people want and give them a park that they're invested in terms of this is what they said they want. They got that. Now they're going to be there to take care of it as time goes on as well. Next slide, please. Here's an image that shows the park, and I just want to show you a couple of features here. The park, at the top side of the park, is a comfort station. That's a bathroom, a concession stand in there, a soccer field, open lawn for just people to hang out, physical fitness area, playground at the base of the comfort station, amphitheater, parking, more parking up at the top there. We can only do so much parking in these spaces. But it's an urban area. People can walk there, people can ride their bikes there. People do that. And then along the base of the river, we had rain gardens, stormwater management that we worked with the engineering team to identify what needs to be done there. We work with NJDEP to figure out what needs to be done there and make that all come together. Let's go to the next slide, please. As I said, this project is in a floodway, so the flood diagram, you can see a blue line kind of dashing around there. So we had restrictions in terms of what we could do. The comfort station building had to be outside the flood zone. The parking had to be outside the floodway line. Along the riverfront, the 25-foot riparian buffer, we did not do lawns. We did more native plantings and things that were more attuned to that type of environment in there. Let's go to the next slide, please. Just about a month or so ago in New Jersey, we had Hurricane Ida that came to visit our park. The banks of the Passaic River overflowed greatly, and per the diagram, the water came up to those floodway lines. Our comfort station, you can see as was built 10 feet higher than the rest of the park. It became a design feature, actually. At first, it was a constraint. How do you raise a building 10 feet and keep it ADA accessible? But it became a design opportunity where we created a fun ramp that goes up to it. The other side of the comfort station has kind of a stadium type steps to it where it becomes a performance area. And as you can see on the right, the hurricane came in and flooded it, and the water went right underneath it and the building was fine. It worked out perfectly. So that was a wonderful thing. It's not look at us, we did the right thing here. It's look at us, we paid attention to the engineers and DEP, and we worked with them to understand the issues associated with the site, and we created it as a design opportunity that everyone can enjoy, and now the project will last further into the future as opposed to being, destroyed by the flood of the day. Next slide, please. Back one. There we go. As I said, along the riverfront, this is a 6.7 acre site. We did 3/4 of an acre of rain gardens throughout the area to manage stormwater and cleanse it and make it better, and even stop a lot of it, stop the quantity from going into the river to prevent flooding from going downstream. So we think that was a big win there. Next slide, please. In this project, because of the work along the river, we increased our native plantings to 94%, another great number there, increasing the activity of the flora and the fauna, the animals that can use the space, the insects, the birds, the pollinators, all good for not just the park, but the surrounding parks, as well as the surrounding community. Next slide, please. Once again, we brought shade into the park, shade trees, shade structures. One more slide. These shade trees were not just pushed off into the edges, they were brought into the lawns. So as the lawns and the park matures, we'll create great spaces for people to enjoy and just relax, and they'll have options once again for places to be. You can be in the sun, you might not be in the sun. This slide also shows that the permeable concrete walkways. I think this is one of the first times that the county used permeable concrete on such a large scale. And it's amazing, you drop the water on it, or the rainwater falls on it, and it goes right through. It's a wonderful way to help minimize the stormwater runoff. Next slide, please. As we do in many of these projects, we created signage to educate the public about the park, its history, as well as its environmental benefits. We do have to educate the public a little bit about why this park might look a little bit different from the park down the road, where the aesthetic is different, where things that were previously thought of as a weedy area isn't really weedy. It's intended to be a little bit more grown in a different manner. So I think that's a great part of this project as well. Next slide, please. Besides what MKW is doing, there are some other projects, go one more, that we just wanted to touch on at different scales. A residential scale in California, but it is happening throughout the US, where people are getting rid of their lawns. They're planting it with native plantings. One, it helps the ecosystem, the pollinators, the bees, the insects. Two, it decreases the need for irrigation. And number three, it decreases the runoff coming off of those what were previously lawn areas. Next slide, please. At a much different scale, the Perez Art Museum in Miami, not an MKW project, but this was a great example of team collaboration between the architect, the engineers, and the landscape architects. This is on, you can see in the background there, on the Biscayne Bay. Definitely flooding happens in that area. Once again, they took a challenge. The area will flood. They raised the building up, and they created it as a design opportunity. Now the building sits very nicely up on a podium, but also they took the space underneath the building and repurposed that for parking. And then they thought one level deeper and said, let's make the parking porous pavement. And then they put native plantings around it, and it just became a wonderful design opportunity that really creates a wonderful art museum, wonderful outdoor spaces, but also something that's sympathetic to the landscape and climate change. One more slide, please. All right, this is my last slide. I just wanted to finish on the Houston Arboretum and Nature Center. Back when I started talking about Lafayette Playground, we listened to the land, we saw the trees that were there before we started to change things. This is a project that didn't necessarily listen to the land at its beginning. They created an arboretum, and because it was the early days of arboretums, they started planting trees and more trees. They realized later on that a lot of their trees were dying, and they wanted to figure out why. And this is 100 years into the existence of the arboretum. And what they figured out was they overplanted. And this area didn't used to be a tree woodland type arboretum space. It used to be a grassland. By listening to the land and understanding what was there and what wanted to be there, they started losing those trees, and they were okay with getting rid of more of the trees. It gave them a more diverse opportunity to teach the public about grasslands and now woodlands on their site. It gave them an opportunity to create more stormwater wetlands, and it created a wonderful ecosystem that was a little bit more in tune with what was there 75, 100 years ago. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you, and hopefully we can continue to do these types of interventions on the local scale.
Thanks a lot, Jim. That was quite wonderful. First, showing us the MKW projects, and then these other examples of how things are done elsewhere. That was great. Now we'll have Rupert. Are you there? Rupert, are you with us?
I'm with you.
Good,
Here
good.
I am.
So we'll start your presentation, and if we can start first with a short introduction of, who you are and what you do, so the folks here have a better understanding of your work.
My name is Rupert Halbertschwager. I'm really proud and happy to be part of this Climate Bridge Conference. I'm a landscape architect and urban planner, and I'm working for on the company Bauchplan, it's called, and we are doing variable projects from urban planning to specific sites, and from bridges to parks to spaces in front of train stations and so on. And yeah, perhaps I will just show you my slides and the work I prepared. If it's, do you see the slide?
Yes, we do.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so this is Vision for Place, and we called this our presentation Act Now. First, I want to show you shortly our team. Our team, we are an interdisciplinary collective, and we have a big team of landscape architects, engineers, ecologists, geographists, sociologists, art historians, plant specialists. And our goal is always to search the specifics in everybody's everyday life. And here you see a picture. It's from the artist Banksy. He did this in London after a flooding. It said, I don't believe in global warming. So we have a lot of problems concerning about all these climate crisis things. So half a year ago, we were invited to create an issue of a German magazine called Garten und Landschaft, Garden Landscape. And therefore, we produced a kind of subjective map of cartography of disasters, where we looked where around the globe you see the effects of the climate crisis, and we connected all these catastrophes and disasters with the anthropogenic impact we all the last 150 years did, and our possibilities to fight this climate crisis. Here you see a picture of a flooding in New Jersey. It's in September this year. Jim already talked about this. And this is in the state of New York. And you see how this affects in New Jersey. 23 people lost their lives. In New York, there were 16 people. And so it really affects our lives in a very dramatic way. Here you see some of the flames and wildfires consume a house in South Lake Tahoe in California this summer. And these huge wildfires were caused by the enormous drought caused by the climate change. And here you see like a lot of cars are getting by the fire. And so what can we do now? I understand, and we've seen a lot of despair and the feeling of powerlessness with all these disasters and enormous challenges that we are facing. But we think this is a call to action for our profession, because more and more fields of activity are directly or indirectly referenced to our professional work. And I want to show you some projects of our office where we try to deal with all these topics. This is, we call it Climate Place in Karlsruhe. It's a town in Germany. And we redesign the station square there. And we won a competition there 2019. And we start the construction this year or starting next year. Here you see the current state on the site. You have huge buildings with glass facades. You have a lot of asphalt, cars parking there, and there's not a real quality of stay. You have, of course, heat islands, no trees, no shadows. So we tried to find design parameters for the designing of this square. We looked about temperature, we looked about wind turbulences, light reflections, and of course design parameters from the humans and the people who use the space. It's how they move there, and where do they stay, residence potentials to find. And this was our competition entry. As you see on the right side, we made a climate simulation on this urban heat map, and our solution or our proposal was have a lot of trees there. It's above a parking lot, so it's not very easy. But we found a way. I will show you later to do this, and we're also having like a water and to make it to cool down the area and make it more livable and usable. Here you see one of this visualization where we want to plan this climate growth. And here's another visualization where you can see how we try to connect or to combine these climate growth with the play of water. And of course, it's necessary to have still parking places there also for taxis and so on and cabs. But it was very important for us to treat cars equally than the others, like the people walking there or bicycles and so on. This is like how we designed the entry to the south portal, and I think this is very interesting for us. We used it's called a system. It's called sponge city system. So we try to bring as much as water as possible under to the ground, and use also roads and other places to absorb water, and you have a system of the shade of the trees and enough water downside, because we store this, and the evaporation, because we want to plant really big trees so they have a very fast also the shadow and also the evaporation. Here you see how we designed a special way of pavement, and where we said that you could use this as a space, but also that the water can go down to the trees. And here you see the further development of this of the system, where we can try to bring all these together. So we have designed a very specific heat models, how to bring the water best to the trees, and also combined with the movement areas of the cars and trucks they have to go there in this big train station, and combine this. And we have for the roots of the trees, we have 1,200 cubic meters of soil. I think it's about 43,000 square feet, or not square, cubic feet. This is the system. So the system of the sponge city, it's a very easy system. It's kind of we try to extend or the roof, the root space, so the trees can grow also not just in the place where you plant them, but also under the pavement. And it worked. We tried this a while, and there are also some in Stockholm and Vienna, some places where it already was tried out, and it works really well. And of course, in the summer, we need an irrigation system for the trees, and we built this with very big pipes, so we can have the irrigation and the ventilation for the roots of the trees, and we can have the best way to that the trees can grow. I will have to show you another project. It's a civic park in Puchheim near Munich. It's called Kennedy Meadow, Kennedy Wiese, and it's a huge meadow above a garbage dump. The garbage down there is 5 to 8 meters, and there's just about 30 to 40 centimeters of soil above. So it was not so easy to find a solution for this way, but together with the engineers and we found it was possible. And what we did there is a very intense participation process because it's near Munich, but Munich is a very rich city. But around there, but there's also places where you have problems with people around there not so rich and they're poorer. And so we did a lot of participation processes to network all these people around and define their needs. It's not so easy to reach these people or to talk to them because normally they're kind of afraid to talk to our planners or even to people in the municipality. So we made a temporary ice skating rink there that the people could. We also build it together with the people living there and with the kids and the juveniles there, and so they came and just skated and did some ice skating. And during this process, we talked to them and they could fill out some questions so we could find the needs of these people. And then we built together with them some tree houses, and they were painted and constructed also by the people living there. And here you see the result after 3 years of planning and construction. And here you see these, especially in these houses where you have these kind of social problems with. I want to show you also another project. It's called Open Air Supermarket and Open Air Box because it's to get food or the production of food is also a very important topic for us, and food production in urban areas is a big topic. This is a new development site. It's called Freiham near Munich. And our proposal was to make a city of straw balls. And inside the city of straw balls, we planted vegetables and so on, that the people who gonna move to this new area have a special connection to this area and will find have this topic of urban farming, bring it to this place. We did a lot of parties and festivals there. Here you see the construction of our building. Here you see as it in the end, and we planted all these vegetables and so on. Here you see salad, the planting campaign with the people living there or gonna live there in the future. Here you see like the bath and of course always music and bringing the people together and having a social experience there. Now I'm showing you the last project. It's called New Mile Böblingen. This is quite interesting because Böblingen and Sindelfingen, they are neighborhood and partner cities, and they are the home of Mercedes. They're the biggest Mercedes plants there, and also Mercedes was found there. So it's really a car city. And Here you see also the train station road, it's called. How we found it there, it was 2013. We started the project. We also won a competition about this. And you see, of course, it's a car-centric, a street made for cars, and we said, okay, we have a vision how to make it more visible or more livable, and to have the people around there. And this is the result. We still have the big road in the back, and we did this water system, water fountains, and when the cars drive, we have a green light. The fountain will go up, and you have like a noise barrier also from this traffic. And when it's when red and there are no cars going, the fountains go down, and you can see the old city center. We also did a very special light system with these light rings to make it a special feeling going to this new street that was a car street before. Here you see there was no place for bicycles and so on. And this is a real picture. This is a result. It's not visualization how it is now, and that it's a pedestrian zone. Here you see as before, and another playground for kids and water around there. And these were the topics we were talking about here. It was social sustainability and teamwork and appropriation. We need to find fair materials and reuse of existing materials. We've also found there, and intelligent resource management. And we were looking together with the municipality about this long-term vision of this town, and we called it Smart Urban Upgrade. And it's about ecology, of course, throughout the whole life cycle. That we used here natural stone there from with a very short way of transport. And one of the most important thing, if we think, is identity, because the people, we need to design for the people. Of course, we need to design for the ecological needs and to fight the climate crisis. But we need to do it together with the people living there. And so the identity and design with and for the users is one of our main topics. So here you see some images, and I would say thank you for having me here.
Thanks a lot, Rupert. That was quite a wonderful presentation with really beautiful projects. So we're going to open it up. We have about 20 minutes for questions. So is there anyone here who has a question, like to ask a question? So here you go. We'll give you the mic.
Hi, my name is Lisa Vichel, and I work for in Donna's office alongside her in the Office of Planning Advocacy. And first, I just want to say great presentation, everybody. Am I getting a little feedback? Okay. And my question tends to be about when we do planning for the state, one of the key components is the visioning and public input process. And sometimes we run into a little bit of issue, especially when it comes to topics such as revitalization, because sometimes it becomes synonymous with the taboo topic of gentrification. And we run into a little bit of a situation there. And I was wondering, as landscape and within landscape architecture, if you guys have found the key to getting that public input early on so that kind of doesn't become an issue later, or is that something also landscape architects are struggling with?
Good question. I guess, Jim?
We definitely agree that early input is critical, but it should continue throughout the whole process because as input is provided, we all learn a little bit from it, and then that kind of shapes the next round of views and then the next round of ideas. And so I think the process of back and forth, that it's not just always a straight line to the finish line. The fact of taking community input, using it, and maybe circling back to another idea or circling back to another thought is important. So early is important, but continued throughout the process is where we have found some success as well.
Thanks, Jim. Donna, are you still there? Are you with us, Donna?
Yes, I am. Yes,
Can
I
you talk a
am.
little bit about how the public involvement, public engagement, and how that relates to the bigger picture of New Jersey planning and your goals?
So we really encourage our municipalities to do a public input process very, very early on, because what we've learned is that if the public is involved from the beginning, they're more inclined to support whether it's a redevelopment project or a development project. They are more inclined to support those programs. It's important for them to understand that we can't please everyone, but I think mostly people want to be heard. And if they're heard, they don't feel like something's happening in a back room with a closed door. And the public is generally more apt to support a program where they know what's going on, even if they don't get everything they want. So early on is important. I agree that circling back is good. We haven't generally done a lot of that, but I think that's really a good take back. That I think that's something that we should encourage. And so what we see sometimes is that sometimes they want to create a plan and then do the feedback. But what we try to encourage is before you do the plan, get the feedback so that you're not spinning your wheels.
Thanks, Donna. Rupert, how does this process work over in Germany? Public input, public engagement process.
It's also a kind of difficult question, but it's I think every dollar and cent you spend in early participation will come back double, and so it's really important to our projects are mostly by the public. So the municipalities pay for these processes, and the municipalities pay also for most of these street areas and parks. And so I think it's also very, very interesting issue because of course they spend their money in areas they are not where the rich people are, and so this is kind of also not so easy for this topic of gentrification because the people can stay there still.
Thanks, Rupert. Jim, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, when we started doing public participation, we used to hang signs and say, come to our meeting. Now we've evolved to the point where we go out to people and we say, okay, you're having a community fair on Saturday between 1 and 4. We're going to take a table at your community fair and we're going to show you what we're doing. We're going to come to you instead of inviting you to come to us. And I think that interaction becomes a lot more important as well. Meeting them on their turf as opposed to coming to us in this other room over here.
That's an excellent point. Anyone else have questions here in the room? Diana, you can get that. And I have another question. There are some questions in the chat. How do I get to those? Okay, the chat will go next after Diana.
Hi, this question's for Donna, but it could be for others as well. The Blue Acres program, particularly in New Jersey, have you seen any, maybe we'd call it luck, but convincing homeowners in places other than, say, Manville, South River, which all have very similar demographics or different types of demographics, but maybe the pie in the sky is like Deal, New Jersey, or some other part of New Jersey that is in a floodplain. But have you seen homeowners who are not of a particular low income demographic actually participate in that program? It just seems like those communities have a lot of resistance for a lot of different reasons, but I'd like to hear if there's other communities that maybe, I don't know, have shown an interest or
I do know that Woodbridge had a very successful Blue Acres implementation. I think the issue from the homeowner level is more of an emotional response than a practical one. Many times these are homes that they brought their families up in. And it's one thing to sell a piece of property, but to know that house is going to go away and become a park. It's more of an emotional piece. I don't think sometimes families are not quite ready to move. But if you can get some good buy-in, in fact, we have a staff member who participated in the program, and it's a difficult program because you're selling your home. It's no different than really selling any other home. So from the homeowner perspective, it's more emotional, I think, than practical. There are some logistical issues with valuation and getting the process to work. I know Woodbridge did it very well. But I think the practical pushback is sometimes from the municipality because they don't want to lose those ratables. So it's a difficult call for the municipality as well. But if you can but after a while, once there's repetitive losses time and time again, there's only so many times that a homeowner can rebuild, and only so many times where you're able to put the time and effort and the money into replacing your furniture, replacing your hot water heater, your water heater. It gets difficult. So I think once you have the repetitive losses, it becomes a little bit more palatable.
Thanks, Donna. Can we have at least one question from the chat? There we have at least 6 comments.
So this first one is from Tyler Holden. He asks, in regards to getting the public involved with large-scale city town planning, what are the best ways to get as many people as possible involved and keep them involved along the way as the project develops? And then he adds, I feel like it could be easy to lose people along the way in complicated projects.
Great. That's a great question. So just to kind of rephrase that, because some of that stuff we've covered already, and this goes for both for Rupert, for Jim, and for Donna, sort of like the long-term view of the role of the public in any project that's sort of developed. We'll start here with Jim.
I think we understand when we're starting with the community that not everybody can be at every meeting. And we work with the community on larger scale projects to create representatives for the community, that they can come and they can really represent either this neighborhood or that neighborhood, or there's an A person and a B person. If one person can't show, the other person can. So that's one thing. We just understanding that people's time is valuable. Unfortunately, we've gone into some situations where a study was done years ago, and now we're coming in with a new project under a new heading, but it really looks very similar to the community. And you just have to understand that these people have been there, and they've probably lived in the community for 30 years or so, and they've seen it all before, and you're coming in with fresh ideas. So you have to treat them and show them that you're thinking is new or why it's new, or that we're not throwing out all that old information that they've invested in already, and respect what they've done in the past as well. So those are just a couple of ideas.
The other thing you can do is I would not underestimate faith-based communities. The churches, the synagogues, the mosques are areas where the public trusts their leaders. And the faith-based communities are more than willing to help facilitate public meetings and public discussions. And it's an area that the general constituency trusts. And they could be a very nice bridge between a governmental project and the public.
And for you, Rupert, long term, you build, so you get public engagement, public involvement, you build something. How do you keep the public engaged in the project after it's constructed?
I think that the main topic is to have a long brief, and you need people there. There you have one or two persons responsible for this project, and the people could go there. And I think it's also very important that you should try to reach people that are not the loud ones, because the loud ones are always the loud ones. So you need, it's very hard to get the people there not so engaged because they're not this educated, or they're not kind of these things. And so I think, and this is a very hard topic, and I think you need to be very creative in every special site you're working on to find ways to reach them. And I think of what Donna said about the faith communities, and there are also a lot of others kind of these communities, and you need to go there and reach them, and to be talk to them on the same level of respect.
Thanks so much for that. So we have like maybe 5-6 more minutes. Anybody in the room who has a question before I? Okay, good. So one question that I have for Donna. Donna, this particular part of the conference has to deal with place, and you've talked about the big ideas, the big planning ideas, and the big goals. What are your favorite places in New Jersey?
Oh, I have lots of favorite places. I love walkable communities, and I know this kind of sounds a little, I guess geeky, but I love walkable communities. I love vibrant communities where there's diversity of cultures, of ethnicities, of different foods. I love restaurants. But at the same token, you need areas that are serene. You need the beaches. My family and I do winery trips, love winery trips. What I think is really cool about New Jersey is you have it all. Whatever you want, you can have. And I think that's what's so cool about New Jersey, is that you can have that urban feel, and you could be minutes away, or maybe a little bit more than minutes because of New Jersey traffic, but you can have a ski resort, you can have a beach, you can have agriculture. That's the one thing we need to do a little bit better at, is promoting our agritourism. We do some of that, but I think there's an opportunity there that we need to do more of.
You definitely have another career in New Jersey tourism, I think.
Yes, I could do that. I could do that.
That was great. So my next question is for Jim and for Rupert. You both saw each other's designs and the work that you do. What did you think about that? Jim, what did you think about the work that Rupert was doing?
Rupert, I think the work looks great. Enjoy seeing it. One of my notes here that I wrote down was some of your creativity with the materials that you're using. One, to draw people out into the site with the temporary ice rink. I thought that was a wonderful idea, great idea.
Mhm.
And that straw bale city, very unique, but very low tech. But once again, drawing the people out, creating you know, if you have a community garden, there's some interest there from a certain group. But if you put walls around it out of hay bales and you start to create maybe a place that somebody can climb on as well, you've just increased the level of interest tenfold. So really exciting ideas. The urban ideas are definitely exciting, and I love the sleek modern designs. But in terms of those simple materials and drawing people out, those were ideas that I definitely will I put down in my notepad and will take home with me.
Rupert?
Yeah, I'm also very excited, and I think I found an ally in our process, because when I heard the speech and the sort of slides there, so that it's very the thoughts are very similar than in our office. Having talking to the people and also so thought it's very great how to deal with these flooding themes and all these work. Not then that it's not a problem, or of course it's of course it's a problem, but you don't see when you see the site. It's not say, oh, it looks like a flooding area. It looks like a great park or a great area, and you integrate these kind of needs in the design, and you don't see it, but but it's usable. So I think this they're really great projects I've seen there.
Thanks, Rupert. So I think that's it for us today. I'd like to thank Donna, James, and Rupert for their quite wonderful presentations. I'd like to thank you all for coming and for having really good questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all the questions in the chat, but that's fine. Hopefully, the material or the questions have been covered. I think a lot had to do with community participation, engagement, involvement, which is good. So thank you all. So quick applause for the presenters, please.